Hi guys, it's Just Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in January. Alright guys, so January was a bit of a mess. I ended up getting sick the first 2 weeks of January and then my husband got sick right after me. I was able to get most of the books read from my January TBR, which is a huge accomplishment because I didn't think that was going to happen. So I ended up reading, I think, 10 or 11 books. Most of them are fantasy romance or romance. I did read one YA fantasy, which I loved, and then I also had a reread. So overall, I read a lot of really good books this month, so I'm super happy to start the year off this way. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit the notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram. It is linked down in the description below. With all of that out of the way, let's talk about the books I read in January. Alright, before we jump into the list, similar to my other wrap-ups, I sorted this by genre. However, I debated ranking them from my least favorite to most favorite books. Please let me know in the comments if that is something you prefer. I do it by genre just because I think it's easier for timestamps if someone's searching for a certain book. However, I realize the wrap-ups I actually watch typically do it from your least favorite book to your most favorite book. So if that is something you want, let me know, or if you want it to stay the same way, also let me know in the comments just so I can gauge how you guys are feeling. And with all of that out of the way, let's jump into my January wrap-up. Alright, so starting off with my reread, I reread House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This is a Crescent City novel. So I read this in preparation for House of Sky and Breath, which is going to be released in February. And I am both so excited and so nervous for that book to come out. So this book I actually think I enjoyed more the second time around just because I had a better grasp of it the second time around. There is so much info and world building thrown into this book, especially in the very beginning, that it's a little bit confusing the first time you read it. I do suggest if you are reading this for the first time, take notes. It's really hard to remember who's connected to who, and it's a lot. It's really a lot, but overall, I really enjoyed this book. I love the main characters. This is following Bryce Quinlan, who's a half-fae, half-human, growing up in Lunathian, and one day a tragedy takes place, and Bryce ends up teaming up with Hunt Athalar, a fallen angel, to solve the crime. And oh my goodness, just the characters in this are absolutely amazing. So if you've already read this book and don't want to go back and do a full reread, I actually have a recap video that recaps the plot, the characters, and everything that really went down in this first book. I'll leave it linked in the cards and the description. I will warn you, it is a pretty long video, but it's really hard to summarize this book. But I did my best. So anyway, check that out, and I just cannot wait for House of Sky and Breath to be released. Alright, moving into YA fantasy, I only have one book on this list. However, it is a really, really good one. So Year of the Reaper, and this is by Mika Lucier. And this is the Fairy Loot edition. As always, it is absolutely stunning. And I really love the black sprayed edges with this, and this book is actually about the Black Plague, and I think Fairy Loot did a really good job with the stylization, just really embodying that. Like, I love just the feel of this book. So this is following Cass, who is a lord who ends up being taken hostage during wartime, and then this plague hits, and almost everyone dies from it except for Cass, who ends up being able to survive and get out of his hostage situation. Now, while he's trying to travel back home, he realizes that he can see spirits, and honestly, that is the only fantastical element of this story. This is a very, very light fantasy. But anyway, he's able to see the spirits of the dead, and he is able to talk to them. And then when he finally reaches home, he finds out that the king is in his homeland and that someone is trying to kill the queen. So Cass teams up with this historian, Lena, and together they try to solve the mystery of who is trying to kill the queen. And oh my goodness, this book was so good. It was so YA, but in the best possible way. I just really enjoyed it. I read this book in like 2 days. It was one of the first books I read after I was done being sick, and I just really, really enjoyed it. I think the pacing is spot on, and this is great for someone who isn't sure how they feel about fantasy. The fantasy, like I said, is very, very light with this, and it's just an awesome, fun story, so I highly, highly recommend. Alright, moving into fantasy romance. So the first one on this list, I'm going to have a slightly controversial opinion, and that is King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. Now, I did not hate this book by any means. I will definitely continue on with the series. So this is following Isolde, whose father is marrying her off to the Vampire King. He wants to align himself with the vampires so the vampires don't destroy his kingdom like they've done many other kingdoms. Now, Isolde's people want her to kill this vampire, obviously, and it just has a lot of tropes that we've seen in Hate to Love, but like so many packed into a very thin book. And I don't know, I felt like it was trying to do too much. Another slight critique or issue personally I had with this is I like slow burn romance. I love the angst just to build and build. And they're pretty much having spicy moments right from the start, which is fine. There was some really good spice, and I'm sure a lot of people will love that about this book. I just love it to be more drawn out. I love just a lot of angst. So personally for me, I wasn't a huge fan. I think on Goodreads I gave it like 3 stars, although I really don't love the star system on Goodreads. But I will continue with the series, and I'm sure there are people out there. I would definitely check this out, pick this up. If you like Scarlett Sinclair's writing and you like A Touch of Darkness like I did, I would still give this a try. But personally, I just didn't love it as much as I was hoping to. And then I read Gleam by Raven Kennedy, which is the second book in the Plated Prisoner series after Guild. So because this is a sequel, I can't go too much into the plot, but we're still following Oren, and overall, not a whole lot happens in this book. I've seen other reviewers say something similar, but yeah, not a lot happens. I did like this book a lot more, mostly just because of Commander Rip. I really had an idea of what was going to happen most of the way through. It is a little bit predictable. I've also realized Raven Kennedy's writing style is just very slow paced, and I feel like that is why it takes me forever to get through her books. I'm not sure if I'm a huge fan of her writing style, but I do really enjoy this story. I will be reading Gleam next month. A lot of you have told me that Gleam is your favorite, and it really gets good with Gleam, so I'm hoping that I like it as much as all of you do. So I'm excited to read that, but overall, this was a pretty good read. I definitely enjoyed it more than Guild, so the series is just getting better and better. And the last fantasy romance book I read was A Promise of Fire by Amanda Bouchet. So this book was fine. It's following Kat, who is able to discern truth from lies, and this is a very powerful gift. So she's kind of hiding from everyone as a fortune teller, and one day Griffin stumbles upon her, realizes what her gift is right away, and he's just taken over a realm and he wants to become king. So he ends up magically tethering himself to her and is taking her to his realm. Now, the only thing I didn't love, well, first of all, let me say what I did love about this. I love the world this created. I love the mythology that was involved in this. I thought it was done very well. I really enjoyed the writing. The love interest is where it went wrong for me, and I was talking to Kristen from Kristen is Fully Booked. I'll leave her in the cards in the description. She makes really good content. And she had a similar feeling with the love interest. He never apologizes, and he never admits he was wrong for kidnapping her. He's got to just like get over it, and it drives me insane. And I couldn't stand it. So unfortunately, I don't know if I'm going to continue with this series. I might. I did enjoy this book. I just had like a few issues with it. There are a lot of other books I think that are a higher priority on my reading list than continuing with this series, but we shall see. But overall, I thought it was okay. All right, so moving into romance, apparently I read 8 romance books in January, which is definitely a new record. I did not realize I read so many until I was compiling this list. However, some of these were absolute favorites of the month. So I'm gonna start off with Hooked, which is my top. And this is Hooked by Emily McIntire. I think I said this was fantasy romance in my TBR. I was mistaken. It's actually dark contemporary romance with an emphasis on the dark. So please, before you read this, check the trigger warnings. This has graphic violence. It really has a lot. So it's very, very dark. Just be warned about that. Now, this is following Hook. It is a Peter Pan retelling from the point of view of Hook, and he is seeking revenge on Peter Pan for the murder of his family. So he has grown up, he owns a nightclub, and one day, Wendy, Peter's daughter, comes into the bar, and he decides to use Wendy in his revenge plot against Peter. And it goes from there. Now, I will say, this is very spicy, and the feminist part of me definitely had to turn away a little bit while I was reading this. However, it was so, so good. I listened to this via audio. Highly recommend listening to the audio version. The guy that does Hook does such a fabulous job. He's supposed to have like a slight British accent, and I think he nailed it. So highly recommend. Definitely one of my favorite reads of January. Just remember, check trigger warnings, and just know going into it, it's very, very dark, but so, so good. And next up, I read She's With Me by Jessica Cunsolo. So I picked this up because a lot of people compared it to Flock, and I can see how people made that comparison. However, personally, I wasn't a huge fan of it. It's following a girl who's in the witness protection program, and when she goes to a new school, she ends up meeting this group of friends, and she ends up having a crush on one of the guys, and this guy in particular races cars illegally. It was okay. I honestly had to go back and like flip through this book to remember what happened. It just wasn't really a standout read for me. There isn't any spice. The characters are younger, and I think that is more of my issue. I really don't love reading about high school. And yeah, I just didn't absolutely love this. I do believe this is the first in the series. I don't know if as the series goes, it gets better. I won't be continuing with it. But if you want just like a cute high school contemporary romance, I would check this out. Personally, it just wasn't for me. And next up, I read a mafia romance that's been on my radar for a while, and it did not disappoint. And that is The Sweetest, Oblivion by Danielle. So this is following Elena and Nicholas. So Elena is the eldest daughter of someone really high up in the mafia, and then Nicholas is a made man that like everyone fears. And Elena's younger sister is actually supposed to marry Nicholas, but because of some unforeseen circumstances, Elena ends up marrying Nicholas. And oh my gosh, the angst. I loved it. I loved everything about this. So I really love the Brutal Birthright series by Sophie Lark. I honestly might like the series a little bit better. I think because the books are a little bit longer, I just had more insight into the characters. The steam in this was so good. Overall, I just really, really enjoyed this, and I cannot wait to continue with this series. All right, so these next two books are from the same author, and I read both of them in a day. So this is definitely an author that I need to binge. Once I start her books, I cannot put them down. So the first one is Reminders of Him, and this is by Colleen Hoover. This is the first, or her newest release, and it has mixed reviews. However, I think it was absolutely phenomenal. I really enjoyed it. It is following Kenna, who is recently released from jail at the start of this book, and when she went to jail, she ended up losing custody of her daughter. So now she is trying to get back into her daughter's life. However, the people that are raising her daughter want nothing to do with her. So when she goes to the town that her daughter lives, she meets Ledger, who ends up trying to help her get back on her feet and get reconnected with her daughter. It was so sweet, and I was just sad and like weeping the entire end of this book. Literally at one point my husband went outside and I was just on the couch crying, and he was like, "Why are you doing this to yourself?" Because Colleen Hoover. I really, really enjoyed this. It was so emotional. I love the relationship between Ledger and Kenna, and it was just a very sweet story with a sweet message. So I highly recommend, especially if you like Colleen Hoover, you're going to love this. And yesterday, I finished reading Maybe Someday, and I cannot stop thinking about it. So thank you so much. A few of you told me to pick up Maybe Someday as my next Colleen Hoover book, and it's absolutely amazing. It's definitely one of my top 3 books by Colleen Hoover. So this is following Ridge and Sydney. Sydney, in the very beginning of the book, ends up breaking up with her boyfriend because she finds out that he's been cheating on her with her roommate. So she ends up moving in with Ridge, a guy she barely knows, and together they start to write music, and she writes the lyrics for the music that he composes, and the story goes from there. I don't want to give too much away, but oh my gosh, it was just so good. I started it yesterday morning, and I finished it, I think, like 11 o'clock yesterday night, and it was such a cute story. Ridge is definitely my favorite fictional boyfriend. He is just so good. I absolutely love him. I did find out that there are 2 other books that I think are either a prequel or companion to the series that don't have great reviews. Let me know if you have read them, because I really am curious and I do want to read them, but I also don't want to read them and have them not be great and then like bring the book down. So let me know if you read them, because I'm very, very interested. But overall, highly, highly recommend picking up Maybe Someday. And next up, I read Waking Olivia by Elizabeth O'Rourke. I saw Jess from Peace Love Books talk about this on a TikTok. She said she absolutely adored it, so I figured I'd give it a shot. I did end up really liking it. It's very, very unique. So it's following this girl, Olivia, who has this condition where she runs at night, which at first to me didn't seem like a big deal. However, she runs miles. So she'll wake up having no idea where she is, and it can be very, very disturbing, and it's really impacting her life because she is a marathon runner and she runs long distances. However, if she's up all night running in her sleep, it's really impacting how she runs in tournaments. So she ends up meeting her coach at this new school, Will, and they start to kind of form a relationship, not in any sort of romantic fashion, but Will just wants to help her. So he ends up having her sleep at his farm with his mother, and then he tries to stop her every time she runs, and then obviously a relationship starts to form. This is not a taboo romance. I don't think there's a big age gap between them, but it is a little bit taboo because it is a coach and student relationship. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I don't know if it was one of my favorite reads. Once again, it was just so unique and so different, so I really enjoyed it for that reason. The romance was pretty good. I'm not sure if I completely loved it, but overall, definitely a decent read and definitely something I would check out. And last up, I read Still Beating by Jennifer Hartmann. I will say this book was not at all for me. It was very, very dark. It is following a girl who's taken hostage with her sister's fiance by this very disturbed man who ends up doing some very not okay things to them. And then once they're able to escape, it's how they deal with the aftermath. It was a lot of just check the trigger warnings before you go into this. There is just very, very graphic and disturbing things that happened in the beginning of the book that I was not ready for. And look, I like dark romances. This was just a little bit too much for me. I'm sure there are people out there that really enjoy this. The reviews for this were like, a lot of people really, really like this book. And once again, I thought I really liked dark romances, but apparently I have a limit. So if you really like dark romances and you're okay after you check the trigger warnings, I would give it a shot. For me, it just did not work. I will not be rereading it. Yeah, and that's all I really have to say for that one. Alright guys, those are all the books I read in January. Please let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books, which is your favorite. I said this already, but I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday, and I will see you all next week. Bye!